Okay. I think we have now 5.
Yep, and we should have probably 7.
All right, well, why don't we just get
I think you
started a
start.
little bit and then, yeah, because, good morning, everybody, first of all. How y'all doing today? What I'd like to do, I'll introduce myself, and I'd like to have you each just say who you are, who you work for, or what you do. And tell me if you have any grant writing experience at all, or, what your goals are, just a few of those kinds of things. So I'm Dale Krupa. I'm your instructor for the next two days. We have the second session tomorrow. The first session is going to cover different things, and we'll see how far we get. I usually leave space on the second day to cover anything we couldn't cover on the first day. So I've been in the community and economic development world for over 40 years, and I've written 135 and counting grants. I have a couple pending right now. I've written grants for everything from human services to affordable housing to economic development to community, just general community revitalization, libraries, any number of things. Probably things I'm forgetting, daycares. So I've had a variety of experience, mostly in the community development space. And I've been doing it as a consultant and as an employee. I was formerly the economic development director in Hamden, Connecticut, where I work, where I am now. And I had the grants department under me. And so now I'm more of a teacher, mentor, coach, and work with different folks that write grants. So with that, I would love to have you again, just say who you are, where you work, and what your background with grants and what your goals are. And I'm looking at Marie first, so sorry to put you on the spot.
Hi, good morning. So my name is Marie Shearing. I'm a nursing supervisor for Yale University. Um, I have no experience with grant writing at all. I just started a home care agency, small business, and I was interested in applying for grants. And I'm a person who's hungry for knowledge. So when I spoke to Karen in regards to seeking some grants, and she stated that there's a class, and I just, automatically just hop on to see how I can assist in my own business and for me to have the knowledge base for any future um, opportunities that I may need.
Great. Thank you very much, Marie. How about Wanda?
My name is Wanda Guzman. I am the manager of adult services at the Meriden Public Library. I spent 10 years in the nonprofit field, so had some experience contributing to some of the grants that we wrote and a lot of federal reporting on some of the projects that we did. But I shifted career fields and know that the writing style, things are a little bit different in the library world. We've had a consultant who's been writing our grants that are run through our friends. And so she'll be leaving us soon. So I'll be taking over just to make sure that we can continue offering the programs and services that we do. And yeah, I just wanted to brush up because it's been a long time since I've, even contributed to any of the grants that, that we have going on.
Yeah, I've written a state and federal library grant and have contributed grants to library, I've written grants for libraries for physical, like ADA improvements and things like that. But also very interesting, I'm working with the city of Meriden right now, and we're doing a 5-part series at that beautiful library. It's a really beautiful.
Yeah, it took us.
We had the first one on April 2nd and the second one's April 25th.
Yeah, what's the program?
I get you more information, but basically it's an economic visioning program for the city of Meriden.
Okay, yes.
Yeah. And there's a session on funding and grants in June. I think June 2nd, if off the top of my head. But it's a really, really beautiful library. I really am impressed with it.
Yeah, a lot of blood, sweat, and tears to get there, but we're there.
All right, let's go with, I'm sorry for if I mispronounce, Lily, sorry.
Hi, I'm Suri Ellis, but you can call me Lely for short.
Thank you.
Whatever is for you. I am the owner of La Isla Spanish Restaurant, and we've been in business 2 years. I've written or like requested a couple grants and haven't gotten any, so I just felt like it's probably a good thing for me to take this class.
Just out of curiosity, where did you apply to?
I did one of the women's business grants and then one under the Minority Business Development Center.
Okay, I'm familiar with both.
Yeah.
Okay, so we have a little experience so far. And Jemiah, am I pronouncing that correctly?
Yes, hi, good morning, everyone. So my name is Jay Maya, but you guys can call me Maya for short.
Thank you.
No problem. So I am in my last semester of undergrad. Well, I will be going into my last, I have a summer session and then I have winter, and I should be done with my undergrad. I'm getting my undergraduate from St. John's University in Queens, but I am from Hamden, currently located there. I really would like to move over into kind of the youth engagement, community development, nonprofit sector, especially trying to connect like marginalized communities with like or underserved resource communities, excuse me, with resources or opportunity, things like that. So I know this is a really good skill. I know a lot of organizations need grant writers, and I just am kind of like Marie said at first, I am willing to learn and teachable, so I'm here.
That's great. And I still remember I graduated from Southern and a long time ago. And I still remember the first time I heard somebody talking about grants, and I had like a twinge, like something piqued my interest there. I didn't know what it was, but who knew, and we'll talk about how your writing evolves. That's one of the things that it definitely started to evolve from about that point, because my writing back then was not very good, frankly. And that's so interesting. I'll also, in many of your vocations or interest areas, I will probably share some other resources for you to check out. And Maya, I definitely have a couple in mind for you right away that will be helpful to you to continue after today. And that
Thank you
leaves
so much.
Daisy.
Hello, I'm in my vehicle because I take care of my dad. My name is Daisy, and I currently work at the Mid-State Chamber. I come from a background of 30 plus years of nonprofit, so I am familiar with grants as far as managerial, where I helped write narratives. I also did a grant writing while I was under the umbrella of SAMHSA through a grant for children behavioral health. And my reason for doing this class is as a refresher course for me personally, because I'm launching my nonprofit. It's called Recovery R Us, where I help vulnerable citizens returning into the community in reentry and recovery. I've been doing that on my own, and I'm going to be compensated. The reason why is because I'm a working disabled person, and I'm a late bloomer in school. So I'm graduating finally with my bachelor's degree in health administration.
Good for you. Excellent.
Yeah. And that's why I'm here. I need a refresher course and how to actually, request. And plus, I do a lot in the community, and being able to understand more about the grants would make me a better person to assess my community when they're applying, because I'm like a business consultant on top of that.
Well, interestingly enough, I work with Roseanne on the program I mentioned to Wandy about.
Yes, I was going to say just that. Yeah, we have a lot of series working with economic development. And the first one was on April 2nd. And we're having another one in April 25th.
Right.
It's like a 6-part, I believe it is.
5-part, right.
5 parts.
Well, if you count the first one, yeah. No, it's very good. And invariably, as I said, I think the June 2nd or June 5th one, I forget the date, is going to be on funding, interestingly enough. We have,
Yes.
so we're getting ready. All right, so good. It's good background. If others join, I might just, take a little detour and ask them to introduce themselves. So I do like to know who I'm talking to. So it sounds like we have sort of a mixed bag, exposure to grants, no grants. And that's fine. That's what this is for. There are many, many, many courses in grant writing, and I definitely encourage you all to take them. As it's always good to get a it's like time management. You can never get enough training in it. There's different approaches. I think we just lost Daisy. I think she's connecting. Okay.
And she's there.
Yeah, okay. Anyway, so it's always good to get some training because there's different ways to learn about grants. Some focus on the writing part, some focus on like where you find the grants. We're going to talk about all of it. I talk a lot about the process of writing grants, what you go through from the beginning to the end. I try not to gear it too much to one particular vocation or one target area of interest. But I definitely focus on the process because I find that very often, you're writing a grant while you're doing your job, while you're raising your kids, while you're taking care of your dad in the case of Daisy, and all the other responsibilities of life. It's not like you are only a grant writer. And the other aspect of it is if you're successful in writing grants, you have then to administer those grants, which ends up being a much longer process. We are not going to cover administration. I actually have an administration program, but just for today, we're talking about process. So we're here to learn about how to write and research grants, how to write an effective grant, how to form relationships with the funder, which is probably half the battle, in my opinion. I've been teaching different versions of this course for over 30 years. You all have your little book, right? I'm pretty sure you do. So we're going to talk for a little bit, and then we'll start referring to the book. I like to have the workbook, have people have it in their hand versus doing everything on a PowerPoint, because I think it can be distracting with the PowerPoint. I'd rather talk with you, about the course. So again, we're going to talk about process and resource development. Tomorrow, we're going to talk more about where the resources are. I might mention it. There's no school or degree really that teaches you about writing grants. You could take grant writing classes at colleges and university. I was going to mention in the case of Maya, there's something called the Housing and Community Development Leadership Institute. If you Google it, you'll find a website. The program is run by LISC, the Local Initiative Support Corporation, which is a good technical assistance and funding organization. It's called the Housing and Community Development Leadership Institute. I know about it because I created it. And I created it during the pandemic and turned it over to LISC because they have a lot of great resources for administering it, but I still teach for them. I teach this class, as a matter of fact, and grant administration. So to follow up, we'll circle back to that. So again, having good grant writing skills is always important. It's important when there's a lot of money because you want to go for the money. And lately, because of COVID and what's called ARPA money, communities and state government have tons of money in all different areas of the universe of grants. And when there's less money, which is coming from after year 2026, when the ARPA money, when the COVID money disappears, it's more important to have better grant writing skills to be competitive. So anyway, look at grant writing. I don't love writing in general. I never did. I kind of do now, but it's really kind of a form of power to make your case, to get money, obviously, for the cause. And I like what you said. I want to get compensated. I think I think it was Daisy. You said that. Whoever said it is absolutely right. There's no shame in getting compensated for writing grants. Absolutely, and because it's a really important skill. In the past, there was, like through the 60s, the Great Society. Some of you are probably too young. Most of you are too young for that. And the 60s, the 70s, the 80s, there's lots and lots of government programs that kind of disappeared over time. And it used to be that, you had the state and federal government that funded grants, And then you had foundations, family foundations, corporate foundations, et cetera, that did like art projects and, you know, community recreation projects. But that's all changed. Now there's foundations galore, and there's all kinds of private money that funds housing, community development, daycare, libraries, everything, you name it. So again, you have to understand the trickle down effect of grants going away. And let's start with the preparation. Again, this program is about the process. It's about going from the first germ of an idea to the actual submission of a grant. So the first phase is like doing your homework. Sometimes it's to write a grant, sometimes it's to write a proposal to proceed a grant, and to develop these relationships. Most of the time that you spend on a grant is not the actual writing process. It's what I'm about to go over right now. And so the 75%, I would say, of all the time you spend on grants is in this preparation process. So the first thing we want to do is define the goal, define the purpose. Some of you are going to work on your own. Some of you are going to work with a board of directors. If you're not doing it now, you will someday. And it's really important to be clear on the goal. The goal is, you know, sort of what you want to accomplish and when you want to accomplish it, when you're prepared to start it. You need to have agreement as to what that goal is, whether that is a partner or an organization. And you keep revisiting the goal through, especially the first part of the grant writing process. So it helps you, gives you a sense of direction, clarity on what your ideas are and what kinds of research you need to do. Another really important part of this kind of goal setting and getting ready to go is understanding who is going to read your grant at the end of the day. Sometimes when you call an agency or an organization, the person you're speaking with on the phone might read the whole thing. They might just be a screener. There very well could be a team of people on the other end taking apart your grant. You know, let's say one person looking at the budget, another person looking at the narrative, and some people looking for the backup information. So when you get on the phone with somebody, you know, you just have to get a sense of who it is and maybe their style of understanding. You can kind of tell. Some people understand like detailed information. Some people like the, you know, sort of the idea that you have. Let's go to Exhibit 1 on page 8. Exhibit 1, page 8. I'm going there too. So how do you even get in the game? We're going to talk about grants.gov, you know, throughout the next 2 days, because that's the primary source right now for federal grants. But there are many other places to look. You have state agencies in Connecticut, assuming everybody's in Connecticut and is interested in Connecticut, but every state in the country basically has different state agencies that have different grant funding sources and for different programs. Some are done in different areas of the country. They're done by county. So in Connecticut, we don't have counties. We only have communities and state. I just worked on a project in Jackson, Georgia, and I had to learn all about how county government worked in conjunction with state government. But very often you just need to have a daily place to check. So one example, and it's only an example, is on page 8 is the Federal Register. Has anybody here ever dealt with the Federal Register? Probably not. Federal Register is where I began in 1985 working on grants, and 84 actually. And the Federal Register used to be published only live on paper. You would get it literally every single day. And in the Federal Register, it has everything related to federal regulations, including announcements of grants that are coming out. Sometimes they have notice of funding availability, NOFAs. Sometimes they have information about that grant, you know, maybe a change in the regulations about it or procedures. It's all came out in the Federal Register. Now, of course, you would get it online. That's one place to find out about the programs that would meet your background, what you're interested in. Grants.gov is where you're going to probably get the details on the grant, you know, when to apply, the exact forms that you need to fill out and so forth. But the Federal Register is more of a generic, and there are many, many other sources which we'll cover tomorrow. But the reason I wanted to bring up the Federal Register is they're always really good. There's a really good outline of information that you can find. But the most important thing you can find is a human being, the contact, who to call. And that is always important, no matter what funding source that you are seeking funding from, is to find out who the human being is that would be best to call. And it's important for many different reasons. If you're lucky enough to get the grant, obviously you're going to have to administer the grant. Grants never go perfectly smoothly. There's always problems. Sometimes it's paperwork. Sometimes it's your program changes. Sometimes their staffing changes. It's really important to establish a rapport. And what better way to establish a rapport is to contact them and ask them a bunch of questions and show how interested you are in the program. So let's go to Exhibit 2 on page 9. So when you call, whether it's the Federal Register or off of a state website of some kind, or even locally, sometimes the community foundations have contact information, you always call, even if you know the answers to many of these questions. Now, you're obviously not going to call. And by the way, I have the chat on, so if anybody has a chat question or comment, I'll keep an eye on it. You don't call somebody and ask them 25 questions because that's going to annoy them. You don't want to annoy them, but you do want to ask key questions. Sometimes you ask a good number of them. Sometimes it's a conversation you have with them. You always ask about them and you find out how long they've been working there. You'll find out whether they're new or if they've been there 20 years. But these are the questions and why you ask the questions. And I'm going to go through all 25 of them right now. These are some of the most important things you need to know in getting ready to get your grant together, but also need to know why you would even stick with that grant. Sometimes you do this research and you find out that I should not apply for that grant because I don't meet, my program's probably not ready, or there's not enough money, there's too much competition. And many of you that look at grants probably know a little bit about who your competition might be. You might be part of trade organizations, you might be part of a chamber. And just FYI, with the Mid-State Chamber, I've talked to Roseanne about their nonprofit groups, because nonprofits are really becoming an important part of all chambers. They are like businesses. They have employees, they pay payroll taxes, they have benefits. They're not terribly different than a business. So one of the first things you want to know is what are the maximum and minimum funding levels? Again, some of this information might be in the announcement, some of it will not. You want to know what the maximum is and what the minimum is. Most funding sources have a minimum now. They never used to, and they certainly have a maximum. My advice to anybody, once you ask this question, is never just go for the max. I think a lot of organizations I've worked with have insisted that they go for the max, and yes, you may luck out and get it. But my suggestion, and I just was part of a grant that was for $132,000 when they could have applied for 200, is to only apply for what you need, and obviously bump it up a little bit, maybe 10%, just in case, because there's inflation in services and materials. You want to know what the maximum and minimums are. Second question is closely tied. How much funding is available overall? If you do some simple math, and I just did this recently with this grant for $132,000, we're going to hear in May about that. They had $1 million statewide for this particular program, kind of a community planning program. And I did the math. I mean, there could be 30 towns or 30 organizations that apply, or 50. And if everybody went for the max, they would only be able to fund 5. So my advice to my client, who is the town of Woodbridge in this case, is to only go for what you need. They went for 132 and they had to match, which we're going to talk about, some funding. So you could do some math if you have the answers to 1 and 2 to see if it's still something you want to apply to. Again, some of this preparation might lead you away from that funding sources or towards it. What are eligible expenses? Again, some of this may be clear, but some of this may not be clear. Generally speaking, if you have a program, it's pretty clear in the application what is an eligible expense. If it's construction of something or rehabilitation of something, Generally, all the construction's available, is eligible, all the design, your architects, your engineers, your land surveyors, appraisers. But many of the other costs of doing a grant, and we're gonna talk about budgets, probably today, time willing, are not always, it's not always clear. So legal costs. Many grants that you go for have legal documents, so you need to have a lawyer. Is that an eligible expense? It could be, but you want to make sure you understand, is your accounting costs to manage the grant? You know, maybe they use QuickBooks to manage the expenses. You want to know what's eligible. Audit costs, depending on how much state money and federal money you get, there are thresholds that trigger different audit requirements. Are they eligible expenses? Sometimes they are and sometimes they're not. Most frequently, where people get tripped up with this question are the administration of the program. Now, the administrative cost of, let's say you have a daycare type place and you have programs. Somebody managing the daycare workers and vendors and all that, that provide food or whatever, all of that, usually it's eligible, but you might have some reporting requirements like quarterly reports or things like that. That's not always eligible. So you want to be clear so that if you need to raise more money or you need to find a match for that money, and again, we'll talk about budgets as we go on. How many awards will be made? Sometimes they'll tell you, we anticipate making 10 to 15 awards. In a program I'm looking at for the fall, they usually make about 10 to 15. But sometimes they won't tell you that information. Again, you may know this. What types of grants were funded in the past? This is a question you want to get the answer to, whether it's the person you're talking to. Most, most funding sources will show past recipients on their website. So you could get a sense of who the competition is. So what types of grants were funded in the past? However, there may be changes in the priorities of the funding source through time. Maybe they have their annually or semi-annual, every 2 years, they go out and they have their own internal review of their priorities. And with HUD funds, very often I find that this could change every year or every 5 years. So you want to know what types of grants were funded in the past, but you also want to know what the current priorities are. It's not always in law what priorities are of funding sources. Sometimes it's in policy. Big difference, because law is law. You can't change the law, but you can change the policy. What's the scoring system used to evaluate grant applications? So I find that federally, you don't get a lot of information on this. You sometimes will get priorities for funding, leveraging would be one example of a priority, but they don't tell you the point system. With many state of Connecticut programs, they actually will tell you the scoring system. They might give it to you when you ask, or it might be published. These are things you want to know. If you ask 5 or 6 of these 25 questions to a person you're talking to, they're going to take you seriously. Who will evaluate the applications? Again, I said this earlier on, the person you're talking to, is it a committee? Who are the other people? What are, you can always Google people, go on their LinkedIn page now and find out what their backgrounds are to see if they actually have a background. One of the things that's happened in the last few years in state government, in particular in Connecticut, is there's been many, many retirements of people that had institutional knowledge about the programs that they administer. So you have a lot of folks that are probably, in some cases, less educated than you administering these grants. It sounds crazy, but it's true. And yes, there is a field of working for the state out there if you want to work on grants from the institutional side of it. What are the exhibits that are required for the grant application? This is the one that trips people up a lot. So they'll tell you some of it, but they may require that you have a public hearing, some sort of public notice. And how do you publish that? Through a legal notice, through a web posting, through different state agencies? Do you have copies of flyers? Do you have a public meeting where you have people sign in? These are all exhibits. Do they want a resolution of your board of directors or of the people you're working with? Do they want letters of support? We're gonna cover these exhibits in more detail later. Is there a pre-submittal letter or proposal required? In many, many cases, yes. People sometimes forget to ask this question and then they get blocked out because they didn't submit. And the reason why they ask for a pre-submittal letter is they want to just see the universe of people that are going to think about applying for grants. So they want to know, we're expecting 50 when we can only fund 10. So very often these are just simple, like 2-paragraph letters. They give you that format for it, but is there a pre-submittal letter required? Definitely do that ASAP. Public hearings required, I mentioned that, or suggested, depending on the funding source. Many federal programs absolutely will require public hearing of some kind or public notice of some kind. And what's the format for that? Do they tell you the exact ad or the exact language to use in that public notice? Very often they do. If you're working with the federal EPA, the Federal Environmental Protection Agency, you may think of them as like air and water, but they have hundreds of programs. If you go on Region 1 EPA, you'll see tons of programs related to community health, affordable housing, all kinds of stuff. Are there training programs offered? And the answer is go to every single one you can. Even if you're well seasoned in the grants, you definitely want to go to every training you possibly can. Marie, they want to see you there. They want to see your face. They want to see that you're really interested in this program and that you're asking questions, even if you already know the answer. And you'll also see who your competition is when you go to training. You'll also see who else, and some of these trainings are done via Zoom now. Everybody's sort of adapted to that. And it is actually much easier to go on for webinars and Zoom meetings with funding sources versus traveling somewhere to go. But in any case, you're going to see all the people that you're competing with potentially. And there have been times where I've gotten on a call like that and I see like 3 times as many names as I thought I would see. And I've been around a while and I still see new people all the time. Budgetary affiliations, number 12. All this stuff is going to help you write a better grant, by the way. It's not just, asking questions for question's sake. Are there budgetary affiliations required? This happens if you're going to a foundation, whether it's small or a large foundation, and I'll give you a bunch of names and some ideas tomorrow. Budget affiliations mean sometimes a bigger organization, let's say the Community Foundation of Greater New Haven, which is basically an umbrella foundation of many different foundations. They have their own money, but they also have all these family foundations and so forth. They may require that you get a percentage of your income or revenue from the United Way, which is a very common organization, or the Neighborhood Assistance Act or something like that. They want to know that they're putting their money and getting the most bang for their buck, that you're not just asking for all the money from them. So sometimes they ask that question primarily in the private or foundation marketplace. What's the application schedule and time requirements for completing the grant? Well, this you should know, but you really want to make sure that you get this right, because as you'll see later on, you kind of have to start with the end and back from the end of it to make sure you have enough time. Does my organization need 501c3 status? Well, many times you do, and most times you do, but they might just accept, if it's a state program only, they might just accept state nonprofit status. So for those of you who don't know, you have to go, if you're forming a nonprofit, you have to go through the state Secretary of State. You can get it done within like 48 or 72 hours if you pay the expedited fee. It doesn't cost that much. And you basically have to have like a little mission statement and pay the money and list your officers and, your mailing address and all that. And you can form your state nonprofit status to apply for some state, but most will ask you to take the next step, which is the 501c3 IRS tax exempt status. And again, it's a matter of legitimacy. Most nonprofits and many small organizations have a C3. I run an organization right now. I'm the only employee, and it has a C3. And C3 means that other people can give tax exempt donations to your organization. There's also C4 status, which is a little different than a C3. I won't get into the minutia, and then there's many other C categories, like the Chamber of Commerce is a C6, that's a membership organization. So some people get their state designation and think they have a C3, but they don't. So there's something called a letter of determination that you would get if you were a C3. And if you get the letter of determination, make 50 copies of it, because you always misplace it. Just a little helpful hint from Heloise, as they used to say. What's acceptable and reasonable data for inclusion in our grant application? We're going to talk about data collection actually next today, but you want to know what they think is acceptable data. So everybody thinks of the US Census, and very often that is acceptable, but the census, and I'll get into this soon, is sometimes, 5 to 10 years behind. You usually need to blend the data that you get. And there's many other places maybe you all belong to different trade organizations. You have with the library, in the case of the library grants, you have data from the library operation. One of the key things that always is asked is about surveys. Because, with the proliferation of, constant contact and all these different ways to do surveys, SurveyMonkey, you want to make sure that what you use is acceptable. It may be helpful to you, but you don't want to use it as the primary source of data if they don't think it is. Is the procurement of services to be purchased required? And in most cases, it is, if you're using state or federal money. And when I mean procurement, I mean bid or request for proposal. They will tell you how to do it, but you want to know if it has to be done, if you want it reimbursed. So let's say you are running a kids program or kids playground and you wanted to buy the equipment with the grant. You can't already have a vendor lined up unless you did a procurement, like a bid with them, with, all the vendors that sell that stuff. So you want to just be aware of it. I get into this in the grant administration workshop that I do, different methods of procurement. But most of the times, if you want to use a lawyer that you have, for example, and you want the grant to pay for that lawyer, if the legal fees are allowed under the grant, you have to procure that lawyer. And there's different ways: request for proposal, request for qualifications, straight up bids. So you want to know if the procurement of services, because once they make the grant award, sometimes it takes 2 to 3 months to actually get any money. So, because there's paperwork. So, as long as they make the grant award, usually things are retroactively reimbursable. But you want to make sure first that you followed their rules on procuring it. The difference between legislation and policy I referenced. And that means that if you read something like the Federal Register, you're going to see what federal regulations say about a funding source, or even on state programs, they always reference Connecticut general statutes. You'll see that CGS with a little doohickey thing, little squiggly thing on the end, and you got to go and read about the legislation about that grant. But internally, they do have policy changes and priorities, and I find this a lot with HUD money. With HUD programs, whether you're working in a large city, let's say like a Meriden, I'm using Meriden because we got basically two Meriden people here today. There is a 5-year consolidated plan through HUD that tells you all the types of activities that are priorities. Under that program, it might be 10 times more things, but the 5-year program and the 1-year program, which follows, is all about what's the priority at that time. Do you need letters of support? Absolutely. Yes, 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 yes. Get as many of them as you can. We're going to cover this a little bit later on, but there's always letters of support that are going to be helpful. And then also talking to your state delegation, whether it's a state rep or state senator, as well as the feds. Yes. How many copies of the application are required? This is all over the place now. Sometimes they only want PDFs of grants. So you need to make sure you have a good scanner, or you can save something in a PDF through your Microsoft program or whatever program you use, but most people use Microsoft. Sometimes they want one hard copy in PDFs. Sometimes it's uploaded to a share drive. So it's really all over the place depending on the agency. I'm finding with a lot of state programs now, it's share drive only. But federal programs are still PDFs, and once in a while, there's hard copies required. I always print one hard copy because maybe I'm old school. I'd like to just see, hold in my hand what I'm talking about. And if you want to cozy up and read your own grant, you don't want to be logging in all the time. Is there a required match? Well, very often there is. Sometimes it's 1 to 2. In other words, for every $2 you ask for, it's $1. Sometimes 50-50. We're going to talk about matches when we talk about the budget. What is a match? What counts as a match? What is the age of the foundation if you're calling about a foundation? The rule of thumb here is that the newer the foundation is, the more chance you're going to have to get money from them, because they were trying to make a name for themselves. I actually just started a foundation about a year ago. Actually, Nancy knows this. And we were anxious to find projects to fund, but only certain kind of projects. If it's an old established foundation, you just want to just delve into that a little bit more and find out how much assets they have, how much money they give out every year. Usually there's some publication. They all filed 990s, they file tax returns, and you can actually Google that through the IRS. Are there specific administrative requirements, reports, audits? Because you're going to build your budget and prepare for that, you need to know what you have to do. You don't want to be caught, and I find that people get messed up with grants at the end of a grant because there are all these, let's say, accounting and audit requirements that they didn't know. And then all of a sudden you got a $20,000 bill, you don't know how you're going to pay it. So once you make a grant application, you don't get to amend it and ask for more. You might be able to amend some things within the line items. That is possible. But once you apply, that's it. That's the number. So again, are there special audits, reports? Audits are triggered by expenditures usually. So unless you're in the like $300,000 range or for state and 700,000 for feds, the larger audit requirements don't apply, but there are some audit requirements. Geographic restrictions, again, this is more for foundations. Are there areas that only that grant could be used for? Sometimes it's regional because maybe there was a wealthy person who left money for, let's say, an education cause or a child welfare cause, but they may only want it in a certain geographic area. Can I get on the mailing or waiting list? Yes, you get on every mailing list you can. Again, a lot of this is for your knowledge, and a lot of this is to establish the relationship with the person who you're talking to or people. And if you happen to not get funded, you want to ask if there is a meeting that you can have later to find out what went wrong. Sometimes it's just a numbers game. You didn't make the cut, but sometimes you want to know, and that could be feel a little hurtful because maybe the writing. I see your question, Marie. I'll get to it. Sometimes maybe you're not a good writer. I mean, I wasn't a good writer in the beginning. And people would tell me I had typos, and this is when you had to type everything. Now, of course, you have word processing. Marie asked this, it's not a silly question. Who should the letter of support come from? Well, I'll cover this more in detail, but you want it to come from mostly importantly is the consumer of who you're writing the grant for. So if it's for children, you want to make sure you have letters of support from parents or educators. You definitely need, and I'll repeat this again, you definitely want to have support letters from the state or federal delegation. How you get those letters, I'll talk about later, because don't forget the state and federal delegation funds these people that you're asking. You want the people to know that you have them in your corner. So those are a couple examples. I'll get into technique on the letters of support. All right, so that is sort of like the question and answer, goal setting part of the grant process. Let's talk about data collection. Just give me a second here. And by the way, after you answer all these questions, you may sometimes have to revisit your goal. Sometimes you'll find out, well, that's not what part of what we're doing may not be a priority of this funding source this year. You may have to sort of de-emphasize something and emphasize something more. I've done a lot of this on the fly, or you find out like the procurement issue might be might take away from what you want to do because only certain vendors you want to work with. So, you know, there's a lot of retrospective thinking after you ask all these questions, sort of get this baseline. Somebody asked, can we use our clients and a state rep for a letter of support? Absolutely, yes. And I'm going to talk about how you get that information, like who do you call? I'm going to get into that. If I don't get to it today, I'll get to it tomorrow. So let's talk about data collection and developing your outline. Let's go to page 12. Everybody good so far? Thumbs up. I can only see Marie. I only see darkness. I see characters, black squares. All right, thanks, Wanda. It's strange to talk to. I'll talk to you, Marie, because I can see you. All right, so let's talk about data collection. I mentioned, you know, talking about what's acceptable data before, and data collection. Data is really, really important, but too much data is the distraction. So you want to make sure that you have a blend of statistical information and what I would call narrative information about the sort of touchy-feely part of it, especially if you're in human services. You want to blend the two together. So there are many places to find data. On page 12 is a list of all the regional planning agencies in Connecticut. I didn't put their websites in because they change all the time. So you could Google any of these and you'll get the most current website. And they always have sort of a tab that you could drop down and research. They are the sort of clearinghouse of a lot of data, certainly not every single data source, but a lot of it. And they also are a clearinghouse of census data as well. So you you got to kind of like go at data from different angles. Sometimes you get repeat information. Sometimes the planning agency might only have a community-wide data where the census will get down to even block level data, depending if you work in a specific area of a community. So the US Census obviously comes out every 10 years. Right now we're in 2024. We're working off the 2020 census. And when the census comes out, it comes out very broadly on the decade. So in 2020, you got like total population of Meriden, total African-American, white, whatever population, total, range of incomes. As the years progress in a decade, the census publishes more detailed information. Poverty levels get updated, all kinds of information. So if you're in 2024, the data that's out there is always changing, and always think about that. And you're going to probably see in about a year them talking about the 2030 census. Now, getting census data is easy online now. You just go to the US Census, and what's interesting is you can compare eras with US Census data. If you want to know what everything is going on in 2020, sometimes you're doing data sort of to investigate the best way to make your point, not just data for data's sake. So you might compare census data to something else, and the something else might be the better sales pitch for what you want to apply for a grant for. But the census data is interesting because if you want to compare 2010 to 2020, there's been an increase of this or a decrease of that. It's good. I go in 10 and 20 year increments myself when I use census data to show. I did a lot of affordable housing and community development work, tons of it. And I always compared decades because you would always show, for example, the increased cost of housing over a 10 or 20 year period never matches the increased income of households or families. That the gap between the wealthy and the poor has gotten only bigger, and this has happened throughout U.S. history, really. But so when you compare data, those are the things that pop up. You see big differences, and it's helpful to use that data. So again, there's all kinds of data that you can get. If you're working in a particular community and you want to make the case about that community, most towns have an annual report. They usually do it every 2 years, so you kind of have to make sure the data isn't too outdated. They don't do it every single year because it's really expensive for towns to do it, but they do have reports. The chambers have data. And there's other regional organizations. There's an organization, I don't have it in the book, but it's called Advance CT. They are located in New Haven. They do, you know, just sort of overviews of communities, but I find that they have some good, just general data to take a look at. Probably the most, to me, the best source, and again, you should use at least 2 different sources of data, is Data Haven, statewide organization. Data Haven has really good information about families, public health, all kinds of stuff. I've heard probably 10 presentations by Data Haven people. I learn a lot every time I go to one of their presentations. So Data Haven is another source. You can do surveys. I think surveys are for your level of grants and where you are in your different organizations, or you know, with your goals. I don't think doing a survey is harmful, but I wouldn't rely on it because there are some very, very strict rules on doing surveys. For example, if you're going for HUD funds, they have all these rules on the total universe, and you have to be a statistician really to know how to do their survey. So be careful with that. But I've used SurveyMonkey to sort of just make the case about the needs of taxpayers, for example, but not to use it as the defining statistical information. Then you can go to different federal agencies that look at the consumer price index. You know, again, when you're always showing the escalation of costs for meeting daily needs for families. So that's, you know, there's a lot of sources, but the key ones are for you guys, probably the census and Data Haven would be the 2, but I would just check out all the state agencies. I would go to the regional planning agencies. There's lots of stuff out there. Then you'll be overwhelmed by too much. What do I use? You know, how do I show it? That's the next thing that will come up in your head. So remember how I was saying in the beginning, this program is all about the process. Because let's say you're applying for a grant, the next big grant I know I'm going to apply for is going to be in September. And they're going to make the announcement in July, they told me last week. And I've written this grant, you know, probably multiple times, but I kind of take the same thing. You kind of start with the end. What am I going to be doing at the end? Am I going to be on vacation when this thing is due? If it's in the summer, in this case, it'll be in September. So you definitely want to make sure that you have time to do stuff after you're getting this information. So the format of data, how do you show data in a grant? The old way was to, you know, maybe do a little statistical, you know, work within the paragraphs that you write, and then put the tables in the back. That's too much work for the reader. You got to kind of remember you want to make it easy for the reader. I just looking in the chat, when writing a narrative, it's important to demonstrate the population I serve. This is, yes, Daisy, that is important. Testimony at some point. Again, not all data is statistical. Some of it is narrative. So it could be news reports. It could be, you know, reports it could be reports about the clients that you serve that are out there in the public that have been quoted. It could be anything. It could be, I wouldn't say Facebook posts, but certainly LinkedIn is a good place to reference information beyond statistics. So yes, it is definitely important. So the format is you think about data as being important, but also think about data as a way to break up the monotony of the person reading your grant. That person could get 50 grants they have to review, and you know, and only 10 of them might make the cut. So you don't want to be that one that just has to run on words and run on paragraphs. I use graphics. I use small, you know, in Microsoft Word, you can put in, you know, you can put in all kinds of things that just show tables and things like that. You want to break it up, and you always have the data near the narrative that is mentioning the data. You don't want to just make somebody work and find it in the, you know, in the back in Exhibit 5. Here's the table. Well, maybe they don't have Exhibit 5 because there's a team reviewing your grant. So you want the data to be near the narrative or part of the narrative. So that's how you display it. You may have some tables and other reports that you have as exhibits, and that's okay. But to make the point in the narrative, you want to have the data close by. So I mentioned that that Advanced CT in their the preceding organization, Advanced CT came from another organization called the Connecticut Economic Resource Center, and they put out this profile. You can see in Exhibit 4 on number 13. That's an example of the kind of information that you would try to get information for data for your grant. Again, you all have different ideas and things you're working on. If you're working on the library, for example, like one of you is, there's going to be other trade organizations that have reports in library use and the cost of things. I mentioned before that all data is not statistics. It's in narrative form. Again, it's on LinkedIn, it's in public hearings, it's in news articles, police reports, congressional records, and other important reports that make the case. But again, it's sort of a blend of the two things. As long as you document it like the old term paper you used to do in high school. All right, so that's data collection. Let's we're kind of like morphing into doing an outline, but I want to talk about budgets next. Is everybody good? Do you need a break, by the way? No?
Unfortunately, I have to get off the Zoom. I did call Karen to speak to her in regards to, because I have another meeting with the director of nursing. And so I will be on tomorrow. So I do apologize that I have to get off. I didn't realize it just got sprung on me.
That's cool. I mean, we're recording this, so no problem. You'll be able to see the rest of it.
Awesome. Thank you so very much. I will see you tomorrow.
Okay. Anybody else before I move on to budgets? I want to talk about budgets. The only person I can see now is Maya. Stay on, Maya. I need a human to look at. All right. My wife always thought she does lots of. My wife does probably 10 webinar kind of things a week, and sometimes she has 100 people, and she doesn't see anybody's face. It's kind of a funny feeling. Anyway, let's talk about the outline. Because basically now that you've gotten your data and you've gotten your goals kind of set in place, you have to kind of develop an outline of what you need to pull together. Notice I haven't talked about writing at all. Writing will happen sort of at the end of today and go into tomorrow, writing and editing, but developing your outline of what you need to find out. I'm gonna shift around a little bit and work on the budget with you. So I talked about documentation and eligibility. Go to page 14 and 15, if you will. So there is a library grant, by the way. This is from a library grant in 1988 I wrote for the city of Shelton, which got funded. This was for for a state library grant. There was a federal one that went with it. These are actual numbers that we used to apply for the grant. They did renovations, they bought books, they did all kinds of things in that library. And it got funded, and this was the grant. So the grant itself was $400,000. There were many other things that were not eligible under this grant. You would have thought books and media were eligible, but the other source was the federal government. This was a state grant. So the other library grant was for $50,000 for those things that, if you notice, they're not like construction oriented, let's say. So in this case, they required a match to cover the non-eligible activities. Remember, we talked about eligibility, and that was from the federal library. And then they said that they wanted some cash. They wanted skin in the game, as they say. They wanted to show where some cash would come from the organization. They did not dictate how much cash. Sometimes they'll tell you 10% or something like that. In this case, they did not. So they had donations from their fundraising of $10,000. So then very often you'll see different sources of funding in a grant. The components of a budget are sort of like, this is the components of almost every budget I've ever seen. There's the expenses, where it's paying for and any detail to explain, because they want to know that you know what you're talking about, that you've done your homework. So in this case, they wanted some in-kind contribution, so they know that based on whatever the payroll taxes were, that they had to come up with in-kind contributions towards the salaries, so they would allow the administration of the grant, but they wanted to see somebody do something. I think probably was 10% by looking at this. 1%, I should say. And then they did not specify, but the most important thing I would say about looking at a generic budget like this is to make sure you have all the costs, potential costs related to the grant, even if the grant is not paying for it. So travel, rent, utilities, reproduction, all those things are part of an organization's operation. They may not all apply to the funding, but you want to have them listed so the funding source sees, well, they know what they're doing. They really kind of thought this out. So they say they're using their, some of their out-of-pocket costs, like the rent, to cover towards in-kind contribution, just to make it, spice up the local commitment. And then you have your totals for the grant. Ultimately, you're going to have to prove that you spent that money. So the documentation is really, really important. You can see that, source A is the state, source B is the federal. There was a foundation. There's some in-kind contribution. When they did the actual breakdown of the salary in the grant, as you can see on the left page, they show how they got the number of 10,000. If the funding source didn't agree with that, they would tell you. So this is what you have to do. You have to document it. And I won't go through every single line item here, but basically, the construction costs in number 4 really came from the architects that worked on this product. At the time, I worked for those architects. So I put the grant together. I forget which one of you said you want to get paid for what you do, but I used to get paid to write grants so that the architects will get the work, basically. It was an interesting concept. That's how I really started writing a lot of grants. It was sort of a marketing cost for the design folks, and then I moved into other things later on. So your outline sort of is to get this information on the budget, put it together. I'm not saying you writing the budget. This is sort of like gathering the information to put the budget together. And it's the same thing for the statistical information and the narrative information, which we're going to get into in a little bit right now. So again, the next phase of the grant process is developing that outline of going through the entire grant application and seeing where you are, what you have, what you need, what help you might need from somebody else. Very often you find that you can't do it all because maybe your family member got sick, or you were going to be on vacation for a week that you can't help. Or whatever the reason is, you want to sort of evaluate where you're going to need some help. But doing this kind of outline from the grant, using the grant application as a model, I've used in my life probably 2 million sticky notes. I'm holding them up. And these sticky notes get attached to every page. And while doing that line, do I need help? Do I need to get more information? You'll find out what you're missing when you do this outline. This is not the time to write the grant. This is time to pull the information together. It's your guide on getting things done. There's different kinds of outlines, but I just generally use the grant application itself. In terms of the narrative, let's just talk a little bit about the outline of what a narrative is, because most people think of grants, they think of the writing part only. And that certainly will be a part of it, but if you do well in this, up to this point, the writing part should be pretty easy. So basically, there are 4 parts of a narrative that you kind of need to start to prepare for. This is gathering your information and getting ready to write. The first part of the narrative is just, the prior conditions. This is where all the statistical data is going to go. And you might find that you need, once you see what you have or what you've gotten from Data Haven or one of these places, you might find that you need more, or maybe you're good. You want to, every narrative basically is the same. Sometimes they'll tell you, a little bit more what the narrative should say, but basically it's prior conditions, what you're going to do with your program, describing the program, and how describing what you're going to do is going to solve that prior condition. Simple. It's almost always the same. They might use different language, but and then those are the three main parts. And then there is going to be some sort of evaluation that's required in the narrative, how you're going to report that information. So in describing what the problem is, you might describe it from a statistical point of view. You've had an increase of this kind of incident in your organization, or a decrease in participation in your program because there wasn't enough staff resources or things like that. This is where you compare data. And this is, what you want to start putting together in your outline. You're going to start doing a little bit of writing here, but basically, you want to definitely compare time periods and things like that. That's the description of the problem. Then there is the narrative of what you're going to do. Short and concise. You want to definitely describe it in clear and measurable ways. You could propose that you're going to increase the staff to address the issue. I find staffing is always a problem in organizations now, because since COVID, a lot has changed in the employment marketplace. And you have to sort of describe that as a problem. You're going to hire people, and what hiring people will do. And it will increase the participation of the population, or you could be broader in the way you describe things. It's going to improve the community in general. But generally, you want to tie all that stuff together. The product impact is the end, how you're going to solve the problem. You'll increase participation, like I said, and you might do more of a narrative explanation in solving the problem. You'll raise the self-esteem of your clients. You'll improve the community health, just in broader terms. Again, use the data accordingly. Now let's talk about the length of a narrative, how long your narrative will be. In state funding sources these days, it'll tell you 500 words, 1,000 words. It's never open-ended, and nor do you want it to be open-ended. Remember, the reader of this grant is reading 20 grants, 30 grants, 40 grants. They do not want to have a War and Peace novel. Who's that cute person, Maya? Sometimes I have my cat.
Sorry, this is my daughter. That's why I had my camera off originally.
That's cool. No, I love little ones. As Nancy knows, I love the little ones. So they'll tell you 250 words is like a half page, 2 paragraphs, 1.5 space. That's about what that is. If somebody wants 500 words, it's about a page. If you are working in grants.gov, which we're going to talk about much more, they do it in characters. They have a box that you have to fit in. And you have to, when you get to the point where you're actually going to do the deed and actually write the grant in the electronic format of grants.gov, remember I said that federal is a lot of uploading of things. You're going to find out that your 64 characters too long, and you're going to have to figure out how to cut it down and edit it. We're going to talk about editing as a very distinct phase of writing a grant. Tomorrow, we're going to talk about that. But what happens is you start fussing with this little box, and you start writing, the proposed problem, what you're going to do, and the proposed solution, and you can't fit it in the box. My recommendation always is to use a different program and type out what you're ultimately going to do. So almost everybody uses Microsoft Word. I mean, there might be another program that you use, but I always type everything in Word. Not so much the budget, but the narrative itself, because you're going to have to manipulate that narrative to fit in the box, and you might have to work off the application and actually do it in Word, so you have the right number of characters to make sure, and then you can plop it right into the federal website. With grants.gov, which is a format that you would be working with if you apply for federal grants, you need to have the most updated form of Adobe, because they use Adobe, for using their program. And they will tell you what version of Adobe you need to have, but I just tell people have the most current one. Because that's happened to me where I wrote a whole grant basically, and it wouldn't go through because I had an old version of Adobe, and that cost me like 8 hours of work. So I had to redo the whole thing. So make sure you have the right technology that matches what grants.gov. And it's not infallible. I was on grants.gov this morning on something, and I had a hard time logging in. I don't know why. I have no idea. I had the right password and everything, but eventually I logged in. All right. So anyway, let me just read my notes for a second. Sometimes you'll find in the narrative part, and this is sort of, just advice, more advice from me, is to make sure based on whatever your organization needs to do and what you want to do, that it meets the goals of the funding source. That might sound extremely obvious. It's not always so obvious. So for example, let's say you work for a church and you want to do some sort of program out of the church. It could be any number of things. Well, a lot of federal programs have church and state issues because of federal regulation. You can't have a blending of church and state. So you might have to change your narrative from a church-focused program to a program related to the population only. The churches, you don't even mention the church except as the applicant. So you just have to be more creative. I've worked with artists before, for example, who wanted grants to promote their artwork. Very difficult to do because what is artwork? I mean, it could be any number of things. Usually grants are focused on creating jobs, creating, improving communities. Enjoying art is usually not a fundable thing unless it's through a foundation. So I've worked with artists and I try to get them to work and develop some sort of economic development sort of way to describe what they want to do. They want to develop a working group that will increase employment and opportunities for artists and to create retail sales versus we just want to show our art and we want people to pay us to paint. And that's generally not fundable. So it's the way you think about something sometimes based on what you think. And by now you've already gotten the gist of what that funding source was interested in doing. Okay, let me skip around a little bit. Let's talk about evaluation. That is sort of how you describe the success of your program, how you plan to evaluate the success of your program. So remember, I said there were 4 parts. The last one is evaluation. Ultimately, when you apply for a grant from anyone, your goal is to go back again and again, because unless you have a one-shot deal that's going to solve all your problems, most organizations need grant funding, every year, or at least part of their budget they need for every year. So one of the things that funding sources, let's say in the last 10 to 20 years, have really focused on is how you're going to evaluate the success. You said before, you're going to increase participation in a program, or you're going to hire staff so you get more people, make more opportunities for people to take advantage of your program. So how are you going to describe that? That is a part of what again, this is going to be in an outline form. You're not writing this yet, but generally speaking, you want to find out what the categories of evaluation are going to be, and I'm going to talk about that a little bit later. The last part I want to talk about in the sort of outline part of this presentation is the list of documents, the attachments, the exhibits. Remember, that was one of the 25 questions. So here are examples, and this is not an all-inclusive list, but it's many of them. You're on page 16 now, by the way. You probably need to have in your hands at all times a list of all your board members and all their current contact information. That changes. People's phone numbers change, their websites change. Financial statements that they ask for. Now, some of you are fledgling organizations. You may not have financial statements. You probably have maybe a quarterly report or something informal you did for your board or even for yourself, a tax return. even if you didn't pay any taxes as a nonprofit, if you're a nonprofit. Generally, if you have 5 years of financial statements, what's a financial statement? Well, there's profit and loss, there's audits. Whatever you have to be able to explain this is all you have. You can't make it up. And I've had a lot of experience with grants, but I don't always have 5 years of financial statements. That's something sometimes they want. So will they accept 3? Usually they're flexible as long as you have something to show your viability, your capacity. The letter of determination from the IRS. This is not the state. This is what I talked about before, the letter of determination. You absolutely have to have that in your hands. These are things you have automatically ready to go because you could even be applying for more than one grant at once for whatever you're doing. The letters of support, let's talk about that for a second. When you're preparing a grant and you're balancing your life, you're balancing your job, you're balancing the data collection, you're balancing, the deadlines that you, public hearings or whatever it happens to be, chasing letters of support sounds like an easy thing to do, but unfortunately, it becomes one of those things that comes and bites you at the end because you forgot to follow up with somebody or they forgot to get it for you. So I start early with the letters of support, having them ready. When you go to your state and federal delegation, you're not going to call Rosa DeLauro. You're going to call Lou Mangini, her executive, her number 2 in the New Haven office. If you want Mike D'Agostino, I'm just making up, these are actual people. If you want Mike D'Agostino, who's the state rep for Hamden, and every town has a different state rep pretty much, you don't go to Mike D'Agostino for the letter of support. You go to Jason, who is his number 1 person who gets everything done for Mike. Most of these political people are not doing the day-to-day stuff like this. It's their assistants. One little helpful hint for you, whether you're a Democrat or Republican, if you call either the Republican House or the State House, and you get their number 2 person who does this kind of thing, very often they will get one letter from both the state senator and the state rep of that party, if they're both of the same party. In Connecticut, let's face it, it's more Democratic oriented, but very often you'll get the state rep and the state senator on the same letter, just saving you time. I really focus on having those letters of support early as possible because people are well-intentioned. They'll say they're happy to give you one. Almost nobody ever says, no, I won't give you one. If you're going to your clients, your constituents to get the letters from them, Maria, I think, asked a question about this before. Yes, you want to go to the parents, let's say it's in the public school system or, daycare or something like that. But also think about how they are grouped together at times. So I've done a lot of work with gerontology and seniors through the years. I've probably done 20 projects with grants for seniors. Very often seniors gather together. They want to at public meetings through a senior center or something like that. So if you're doing something for gerontology, and this could apply to parents, by the way, at a PTA meeting or something, I do sort of a group letter in the form of them signing in. Yes, we support, Maya's grant for, new services. And everybody signs it like they're signing into a public hearing or something like that. That's another way to get a lot of bang for the buck when you're getting letters of support. It's just getting support in that format. You can do that, and that's definitely acceptable by most funding sources to do it that way. So letters of support are nice, they're good, but you can also get sort of group letters. It's almost like just signing, like I said, like signing into a sign-in sheet. Having the history of your organization ready to go. These are things that you should automatically just have in a file. Summary of your programs, brochures. A lot of this is electronic now, but to the extent you have a few paper copies is good. If you're using leverage funds or donated materials, particularly leverage funds, you can't just say we're going to leverage 10% of our funds from another source. You have to have something from that other source, which is the letter. Maybe it's a letter of intent, maybe it's an actual grant award. In the case of the Shelton Library project, we had the actual letter of intent, but not the award from the feds, and that was good enough. Sometimes there's a chicken and egg issue. You can't get the letter of intent without having at least some kind of preliminary response by the primary funding source. But these are all the things that you assemble to get ready before you actually put the whole grant together. All right. With the evaluation, I'm going to go back to that for a minute, and we're going to probably end there because I'd like to start with the writing process tomorrow. The evaluation is very commonly used now at state and federal level. There's a whole bunch of things about evaluations. Is how you're going to collect the data. Kind of going all over the place. All this stuff is in the workbook. You're going to find out how you're going to collect the data. Do you have help to do that? We have a staff of 5 people. They're going to, have quarterly meetings with our, I'm just making up stuff. We're going to have quarterly meetings with our constituents, and we're going to get income data. Sometimes you can't get income data. So it's the collection. How your agency will monitor the progress, and you're going to have a log of phone calls. You're going to have a series of meetings where people sign in. The second part is sort of how you're going to compile that information. This could be like a computer or monthly report that will be distributed to everybody. Thirdly, how's it going to be analyzed? Who's responsible for it? Again, it shows capacity. Is it the executive director or is it a staff assistant? How often will they be analyzing it? Is it monthly, quarterly? How are the goals measured? How will they be reported? Will it be financial statements? These are all things that come up when you look at how is it going to be analyzed and reported. So that is like sort of the bones of of the evaluation process, because ultimately they're going to want to go back and see, did they actually do this? Because again, you want to get, very often you want to get funded from a source multiple times. So at the end of the day, you have a pile of stuff and a file full of supporting documents. You kind of need to ask yourself before you actually start writing the grant and actually putting it into final format of some kind, is, are you happy with everything that you have? You're going to get a gut feeling that you don't have enough data, you have too much data, you're weak in a certain area. That's why you do it in an outline form, is to really sort of get a feel for what you have. Maybe the budget information isn't quite right. You're only guessing because somebody didn't get back to you with a question. The most important thing that comes up at this point, after you've created an outline of everything you assemble, is to see if you have enough time to meet the deadline. If you're doing something like I'm going to do in the summer, I got summer stuff with my family, with my granddaughter. I have vacations, and I'm also putting together a grant. Will I have time to do everything? Do I need help? If you have the ability to have somebody do any of those things that are unfinished, this is the time for you to sort of like reach out and get help. And I've reached out to people even after doing well over 100 grants, 136, I think is the count today. Do you have enough time? Again, don't be too proud about that. Okay, well, this is actually a good spot to stop. What I want to do tomorrow is focus on the actual writing process. We will begin on page 17. I leave 2 hours because sometimes there's a lot more questions. This is about an average amount of questions that you have in the chat. Does anybody just want to talk about what we covered today? Have any questions? Was things to clarify? Okay. So tomorrow,
I'm good here.
what's that?
I was just saying, I'm good here, I think. For sure, yeah.
I'm not sure. Somebody.
I'm sorry, that was me. I may have been low. I was just saying, I think I'm good personally.
Oh, okay. I missed that. All right.
Thank
So
you.
tomorrow we're on at 10 o'clock. Nancy is, if you're on, is Is the link the same for tomorrow? Maybe she's offline. I'm pretty sure it's the same. Here's Daisy. Oh, everybody's coming back.
Yeah, I fly on and off because I'm running errands with my dad, so I'm sorry, I apologize.
That's okay. Listen, this is being recorded, so that's cool. You know, you can, that's why I asked for it to be recorded, because this always happens. So, all right, so we're 10 o'clock tomorrow. And we're gonna talk about the writing process, the actual, the actual part about writing. I will reemphasize a lot of things I talked about today, because it's all about process. Nobody is a PhD writer. And PhD writers are not always clear, by the way, about what they're writing about. We'll talk about editing, and then we'll talk about where you get the money. Tomorrow will be, probably about 1.5 to 2 hours. All right, everybody, I guess we'll see you tomorrow.
Thank you. See you tomorrow.
See you tomorrow. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. It is.